Hello YouTube. So today we're doing another tip around CVs, and you remember in some of the videos that I talk about the CV, I talk about the kind of recommended format for CVs, but how there might be certain unique situations where your CV might need to look slightly different from the recommended format. Well, the medical student CV is one of those situations, and I guess the reason I'm doing this video today is that actually in Australia, where I'm from, it's actually the medical students that are often having to compile their CVs first in the year in order to get in time for the intern applications. So, welcome. I'm a career doctor. I make videos on YouTube to help you manage your medical career. And if you're finding these videos helpful, please leave me a like or a comment. And if you're finding more than one video helpful, then why not subscribe and turn on notifications? So I want to give you 5 tips for how to organise your medical student CV, and let's dive right into it. So, as you would know from watching some of my videos, the kind of recommended format for a CV is something like this. If we imagine we've got a couple of pages, and of course a lot of CVs go a bit longer than that, but obviously the first thing is the focus on the front page. The top of your page, we have your name and your short qualifications and other sort of essential details, like if you've got a visa status or your AMC status, etc. And of course no photo. And of course that names actually should be a little bit bigger there. Now usually then there's some sort of statement, and then we get into work, and if we're lucky, lucky's probably not the right word, but if you had a short career in medicine, you might find that your education also gets onto that front page. And then we've got all the other stuff here. And of course, the final thing is referees. Now, obviously, the thing about a medical student CV is that one thing that you won't have is a work history, at least in medicine. You may well have some work history from outside of medicine. We'll talk about that shortly, but you won't have this work history from inside medicine, so we can actually remove that section. So that actually frees us up for a bit of space. And so one thing here is, and this is my kind of tip 1 and tip 2 here, is you can put a little bit more into your personal statement. That can take up a little bit more room. And the second thing is you can focus a bit more on your education as well. So I think because you don't have a work history, the personal statement is still crucial. At this stage, you should be telling the panel a little bit about why you chose to get into medicine in the first place, what you've been doing in your medical school career that's been of interest to you in medicine, and how that dovetails into the sort of career you might see yourself having as a doctor. But don't get too far advanced. Don't talk about, being a cardiothoracic surgeon or something like that. I think sometimes that plays off not so well. But, if you're interested in procedures, or if you're interested in research, or interested in teaching or rural medicine, that's good stuff to put in there. And then try and finally end with how you can add a bit of value to the employer. Now that can be a little bit difficult at this stage, particularly when your CV might be being read by more than one employer, but some of the unique things that you've done in medical school, or whilst you've been at medical school. Don't forget the things that you might have done, again, part-time work, extracurricular activities, that sort of stuff. So, maybe you did a bit of tutoring when you were at medical school, so you can talk about how you can help with possibly help with the local teaching program. So personal statement or career goal statement, and then education. And so here again, this is where the use of narrative is important. So tip number 2 is to tell the story of your medical school, what you did, what you achieved, what sort of, did you win any awards, did you do a research paper, what was it about, what sort of electives did you undertake, where did you actually study in your clinical years, what did you get to see, what types of cases, etc. Give a bit of flavour to that. Otherwise it becomes a boring series of dot points. So that's tip number 2. The third tip is, and you remember I talked about this, a lot of you will have done some sort of work. whether that's to get through medical school or before medical school. And really, I believe you should put all your work history on your CV, even if it's just to list things that have been a little bit further into the past. So again, there may be some things in your work that are of particular importance that you'd like to highlight, and if so, they should also come into the personal statement. But the perfect example I give is that I was once asked by a medical student about the fact that they'd worked as an executive assistant prior to medical school, and I said you absolutely should put that on your CV. Executive assistants are kind of the linchpins of teams. They're highly organised, they've got lots of skills, they can project manage. Why wouldn't the panel want to know that you've done something like that successfully? So don't forget to include other work history just to flesh it out. And then of course you've got all the other things, and again, it doesn't, like, you can decide on the headings. You can have research or publications or teaching or leadership. But if there's anything really good there, make sure it comes into the personal statement, or at least into education, because a lot of that stuff that you might be listing here might be related to the time you're in medical school. So the education just doesn't have to be about what you studied formally. It can be during that period, just to make sure you get that point. So that's tip number 3. Don't forget to talk about your prior work history. Now tip number 4 is you will be required to have referees, and so my tip here is to not leave that too late to ask people to be referees for you. Often I find medical students are suddenly realising they have to put in a CV, and they realise they haven't got any referees, and they feel a little bit lost because they don't know who to ask, or they haven't asked people. So rather than in your final year, think about maybe in your penultimate year starting to approach people that you work with. And you don't necessarily have to have all doctors as referees, by the way, as a medical student. It can be other people that, as long as they can vouch for you and talk about the fact that you were a medical student, and they had some sort of oversight or supervisory relationship. So it could be like a year manager, for example, or something like that. But just make sure you do get your referees early, because you don't want to be running around trying to do that late in the piece. So that's tip number 4. And then my final tip is this. I actually wouldn't get overly concerned about the CV at the medical student phase. In most states of Australia, you are required to submit one. You aren't in New South Wales for most of the applications, you are for the rural pathway. But the thing is, we know, like, having been an employer, we know that the value of a medical student CV is somewhat limited by virtue of the fact that there is none of this medical work history. That's the goal for us. We want to know what you've been doing in your doctor work. And without that, it doesn't tell us as much. So that means that if there is some sort of competition for these sort of intern places you might be going for, there will be much greater weight to other things like perhaps your academic results, and probably more likely an interview if that's part of the process. So there are 5 tips on medical student CVs. I've got some more tips in a blog post I wrote the other day, which you can find on the advancedmed.com.au website. Thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, and I'll see you in the next video.